world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Thursday, January 15th, as I am recording this. And of course, we got a lot to talk about. There's always a lot to talk about. Now, once again, recording this a little later than I would like, but going to get it recorded, going to get it posted, and then get up into tomorrow. Now, with recording these later, I could skip a day and just record this as Friday's podcast. But there's going to be so much to talk about tomorrow. We're going to have another whole podcast to go. So we're going to get into it, and let's get talking about everything going on. First thing I want to remind everybody is that I was today's guest over on the Rational Boomer podcast. I love being on the podcast. Mike and I have a great conversation. So I encourage you to go check it out. You can find it on YouTube and Spotify. And if you're here already checking out my content and my podcast, it shouldn't be too hard to go over and just check his stuff out and give him a follow. And then just catch my appearance over there. We had a great conversation, and some of the things that we talked about on that podcast, I covered in my podcast for yesterday. Now, one thing I did not cover yesterday that we talked about, that Mike and I talked about, was part of this whole situation with Donald Trump going to Ford. Okay. Donald Trump goes to the Ford plant in Michigan. And while he's there, he's touring and he's saying a bunch of stupid shit. And I talked about this yesterday. He says things like, well, it's great that Ford has 5,000 jobs they can't fill. Because they're going to soon have robots. And if you're there as a worker and you hear that, oh, yeah, we're going to be replaced by robots, and the president of the country is saying how good that's going to be, that's got to be disheartening. And when you think about all of that, that's not a good sign for American workers, that you have the president saying that we're just going to replace you with robots. We're already having fears about things being replaced by AI and jobs being taken because of AI, etc. And while it's not quite there yet, it's not perfect. Companies are starting to rely more and more on it. And there's a very real fear about jobs being taken because of an advancement in technology. And while there always has been jobs that have been advanced out of service, for example, it used to be you would have an elevator operator. They paid somebody to operate the elevator, and then eventually they figured out an easier way to do it, where everybody just goes in, pushes the button for their own floor, and it's not a big deal, and that job was no longer required. It's just the way things, advance. But there's a lot of fear when it comes to AI and robotics, et cetera, about taking jobs, and there always has been. So the president screws up by trying to calm fears about the economy by talking about jobs being taken. But that wasn't the only thing. There was this Ford worker. His name is TJ something or other. I can't remember his last name. But as I joked with Mike, I'm like, why is it always a guy named TJ, stirring the shit? As it was a shout out to our friend TJ the plumber. And if you've listened to this show or my lives or Mike's podcast, you know how TJ likes to stir up the shit with Republicans. And he shouted at Donald Trump, called him a pedo protector. Okay. Calls him a pedo protector. Donald Trump looks at him and says, flips him the bird, says, fuck you, fuck you. Well, that's real classy for the President of the United States to be talking like that. Now, I'm not trying to be President of the United States. I'm not a politician. I'm just a podcaster. It's a little different for me to use that kind of language, but the President of the United States is always supposed to have an air of sophistication, things like that. And we know Donald Trump doesn't have those things. Well, this whole story, apparently Donald Trump has been calling, and Ford suspended this guy initially. Um, Sounds like the union has fought to get him his job back and he is safe. But Donald Trump has been calling Ford numerous times today trying to get this guy fired. Well, even if he does succeed, and it sounds like the union is stepping in and doing what they're supposed to do and protecting him from getting fired for uh, for using his free speech um, against the president of the United States. Uh, Even if he gets fired, there was a GoFundMe, and last I had heard, and it's probably over this now, it had raised over $700,000. It's probably well over $1 million now, and he's probably raised more than enough that he can turn. And I think he might have even turned off the GoFundMe, or had whoever set it up for him turn it off, um, where he can just retire at this point and be fine. But that's not the point. Donald Trump wants retribution because this guy embarrassed him, because he brought up the fact that Donald Trump is connected to the Epstein list and that he is doing everything he can to protect the people that are in the Epstein files. Donald Trump doesn't want the Epstein files released. And we know that by what is going on with his administration, with everything going on, with the fact that they have only released 1% of the Epstein files. Now, I'm going to clarify something I said yesterday. And I did a TikTok on it, and I said it in the podcast, and apparently I was slightly off, or maybe I didn't get the message completely through when I said Bill and Hillary Clinton were not going to testify in front of Congress. Apparently, what they had actually said was they weren't going to testify in a private closed door meeting, and that's kind of what I had suggested, that the Republicans want to do it behind closed doors. They just want to get sound bites and make it into something that it's not. But they want to testify out in public in front of everybody. And they also said that they would testify once the entirety of the Epstein documents have been made public. That they would not testify until then, because things that are in there could be used against them in this hearing, and it's not public enough that they can defend themselves. So those are a couple things going on there. Now, as we're focusing with everything else going on in the country and in the world, we can't forget about the Epstein files, because a big chunk of what is going on in the rest of the world stage and some of the other stories that we are hearing is all a distraction from the Epstein files, because Donald Trump doesn't want that made public. He doesn't want to be connected to Epstein. And there are people making claims, including Sasha Riley, who I talked about yesterday, claiming that Donald Trump not only knew Epstein, but was the kingpin of the entirety of the Epstein operation. So we can't forget about the Epstein files. We can't let that slide, despite the fact that Donald Trump wants it to just disappear. All right. Now, I talked yesterday, I think it was, about how or maybe it was the day before, where they were going to release the framework of Donald Trump's healthcare plan this week. And we've got the framework now, and it is every bit as dumb as what you would think it would be. They don't have a real plan to replace Obamacare. They never have. In fact, Obamacare was based on Romney Care, which Mitt Romney, the Republican, put in place when he was the Republican governor of Massachusetts. And it's not perfect, okay? But I remember what it was like before the Affordable Care Act was passed. And it was the wild, wild west when it came to insurance. You could get denied for any pre-existing condition. Your employer-sponsored plan could put lifetime limits on you and say, well, after you've passed so much money paid out, well, we're just never going to cover you again. Now, a lot of times it sounded great because, oh, well, it's $1 million. And then you have something major, and suddenly that $1 million is 500,000 of it's gone. Or you have some major disease that requires $10,000 treatments 4 times a year. And suddenly you're staring at, well, will I have enough coverage if I keep working here? And then you could go to a different employer, sure, but they could put pre-existing condition riders on you where they wouldn't cover anyway. It was all kinds of messed up. And Obamacare fixed a big chunk of that. But now we have their framework of a healthcare plan. And what is this framework? How good is it? Well, it's not good. Okay. It is barely a framework, if you even want to call it that. One of the things they want to do is codify what Donald Trump calls the most favored nation status, and basically is trying to tell pharmaceutical companies that they have to pay, or they have to price their drugs, their pharmaceuticals, at uh, the lowest price available anywhere in the world is what we have to pay. Now, that may lower some prices. It might. But then when you add in the tariffs, et cetera, it's still not going to lower everything, because even if it lowers it and there's a tariff sitting there, well, it's going to increase it. So there's a whole bunch of problems with this. And this saying, well, they have to lower it, it doesn't say exactly how or by what measure or anything. And so what some of these pharmaceutical companies could just say is, well, we just won't offer that drug here in the United States anymore because we can't offer it at a price we can make money at. Doesn't say anything from what I read in the framework of this plan for drug companies or pharmaceutical companies that were to do that. Just says, well, they should lower it. Okay, well, that doesn't fix much. Then the next problem is, or the next suggestion is trying to get more pharmaceuticals uh, covered under over the counter, so that they could start producing it over the counter, and you would just be able to walk into your local for supermarket or your local CVS or Walgreens or what have you, and just pick it up and buy it for yourself. Here's the problem: most of the reason most pharmaceuticals are under the way they are is that they require a prescription, is so you don't overtake, because there are massive side effects for overtaking, and that you should only take them for what is required. For example, if you have a common cold, which is viral, you don't want to go start taking antibiotics because they won't work, for one. And two, if you overuse antibiotics, which a lot of people would, it would end up causing, it can cause diseases and stuff to mutate and get resistant to those antibiotics. So that's part of why they are working the way they are. And they also want to make sure you take the right thing for the right um, uh, illness, right? That you take the most effective thing for treating what you have. And usually a doctor is, well, should know your allergies, etc. So you know what you might be allergic to. For example, somebody who is allergic to penicillin, if it's all available over the counter, maybe they realize they're allergic to penicillin, but not any of the other penicillin-based medications, and it could still cause an allergic reaction. It's not a great plan. This is just throwing something at the wall and hoping it sticks, coming out of uh, this administration. And then the last part of it, again, was barely a framework, was talking about these Trump plans, these Trump health savings plans, that they didn't really explain anything about how they would actually work, other than the idea is to put the money in the hands of American citizens. And then those citizens would go to the exchanges, or they would try to buy insurance directly from um, insurance companies, etc. And that would be how they would cover their expenses. But if you're giving everybody, let's just say $1,000, but their yearly premium has gone up 1,500 or 2,000 because of the reduced subsidies now, they're actually ending up worse. Even if it comes out the same, then all you're really doing is still giving the money to the insurance company, just with extra steps. Doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's the best they have to replace Obamacare. Now, today was supposed to be the deadline for extending the ACA subsidies. And it sounds like they were not taken up in the Senate, and I'm not entirely surprised. Now, they may still try to pass something. I thought they would end up passing a 2-year extension, and they may try it yet, um, trying to get something done. They may try to kick the can down the road. And I still say 2 years is the best plan because that puts it out past the midterm elections, but before the general election. And it would give them some cover as far as not having to answer to voters for it. So we have a horrible framework of not even close to a medical plan coming out of this administration and potentially expiring ACA subsidies. And Republicans are still thinking they could win the midterms. How they haven't realized that they are losing yet is beyond me. Now, talking about the 2026 midterms, yesterday, apparently Donald Trump was joking when he commented that they should just cancel the 2026 midterms because the president always loses. At least that's according to an official White House statement made by Caroline Leavitt. But Donald Trump does not have a sense of humor. He really doesn't. Have you ever watched him? When he's supposedly joking or um, when he says that something, oh, I was just kidding or something, it's never funny. And it's always something that makes him look bad when people start objecting to it. His actual jokes, if you would call them that, were like when he made fun of a disabled reporter or when he called a woman piggy or all of his actual jokes are cruel, right? Because he doesn't have a sense of humor. But Donald Trump is floating this idea of canceling the midterm elections. Now, there is no system in place in the United States Congress for what happens if elections don't happen. Why? Because we have always held elections, even during the midst of the Civil War, through both world wars, through all of it, we have always had elections. So there's no way to stop them. Besides that, elections are run by the states. So what's going to happen if they try to cancel elections? Well, the red states might try it, or at least some red states may try it. And what they might try to do is say, well, we're not going to hold the election, but we are going to give um, the win to certain people as if they won. And the minute they try it, it is going to be tossed out in court. I almost guarantee it. Now, I don't even think this Supreme Court would be willing to upend the Constitution to that degree to allow um, states just to decide the winner. And Republicans who love to vote, one of the things about Republicans that Democrats hate, or maybe not hate, but um, can't get past is the fact that Republicans always show up to vote, specifically older Republican voters. They know when election day is, they show up every time, they vote every time. So I don't think it is going to actually work to cancel the elections. There are going to be midterm elections, but Donald Trump is terrified of what those outcomes could be. Well, he is terrified of getting impeached if the Democrats win again. And they could have the House, they could get the Senate. Both are within striking distance. I mean, for the House, they only need to flip like 3 seats, and I think they're going to take 30 or 40, maybe even 50, depending on how bad things get, especially now when you add in things with the attack on Venezuela, when you add in ICE doing what it's doing in Minnesota, when you add in all of it, um, there are so many problems that I just don't see how the Republicans win, but they haven't seen that they're going to lose yet. I think some of them are worried that they may lose the majority, but others, they may be wanting to lose the majority because right now all of the pressure is on Republicans. They hold both chambers of Congress, they hold the presidency. All eyes are on them for what is going on right now. And they have to make some moves in order to fix it, right? And they can't fix it because they can't go against Donald Trump. So what they might be hoping for is to get beaten out in the uh, midterm elections and then let the Democrats impeach Donald Trump, and maybe enough of them break ranks and side with Democrats to go after him, right? Maybe that's what they do. And then they can be rid of Donald Trump, move on to JD Vance, and be focused going into 28 with their narrative. And I know what the narrative will probably be if JD Vance becomes president would be, well, you got to give JD Vance a chance to fix everything with a Republican controlled Congress because those damn evil Democrats, they prevented him from doing anything. You know that's going to be their talking point. But when they have power like they do now, they don't get anything accomplished at all. We have one of the least productive Congresses of all time. And when they are passing things and doing things, they're passing things like I talked about in yesterday's podcast concerning milk in schools. That was their big accomplishment. The only other thing they've really accomplished, short of eventually getting the government back open after letting it shut down, was to pass a massive tax cut to billionaires and wealthy people. And they're talking about doing another big cutting, spending bill like that, where they're going to cut taxes and cut spending, even deeper for programs and assistance things when they're not looking at some of the other stuff that's going on. So Donald Trump is terrified of the midterms and he's terrified of getting impeached. Now, if him getting impeached was his main concern or his main worry, Republicans should use that leverage against him, and one of them is starting to. Representative Don Bacon of Omaha, Nebraska. He represents that district in Nebraska. He's a Republican, and he came out in a couple of news articles where he is quoted as saying they have the votes to not only impeach, but it sounds like they also have the votes to remove Donald Trump should he invade Greenland. He basically is calling Donald Trump's bluff, saying, do it, and we will remove you. Now, we'll have to see what Donald Trump tries to do with Greenland. He's been trying to acquire it. He's been talking about giving them a payment of $10,000 to $100,000. And why is he giving them money to come here when we have people here that need taken care of? And whenever we talk about giving the people here money, it always comes back as, well, that's socialism or that is communism. And that's, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Why are we trying to bribe somebody to come here? But in part, Donald Trump wants to be the person who added a big chunk of land to the United States as part of his legacy. And he wants to be the one to add potentially a 51st state. He wants the recognition from that. Well, if he wants the recognition for adding a 51st state to the country, why not push for Puerto Rico? Oh, wait, it's because Puerto Rico is full of Hispanic people and Puerto Ricans are not white, to put it bluntly, so he doesn't like them. And he doesn't view Puerto Rico as part of America. I don't know how many times, and this is part of how dumb he is, he has said that he has called and talked to the president of Puerto Rico when he is the president of Puerto Rico. Now, Donald Trump is trying to do everything he can to push forward with this thing on Greenland. And we are hearing that several members of NATO countries are bulking up the defenses of Greenland, that they are sending troops in advance of the United States getting there. And NATO has said they would come to the defense of Greenland should we try to do anything. Now, I hope Don Bacon is correct and that they have the votes and they are willing to pull that trigger on Donald Trump if he were to go against Greenland. It just tells me that if he's right, that everything I have said, him saying that they have the votes, they know they have the votes, that he would be impeached and removed. And he said that he would be impeached and removed, tells me they are having closed door meetings that Donald Trump doesn't even know are going on. And that they are having discussions about when to make them move, where the bridge is too far. And if they have the votes to remove him over Greenland, it's not a stretch to think they have the votes to remove him over something else, maybe the Epstein files. maybe the ICE situation in Minnesota, among many things that are going on. It sounds like the Republicans behind the scenes are gearing up to turn on Donald Trump, and they're just waiting for him to make that mistake that they think will be the one that, for them turning on him, would be the one to save them with the MAGA base, right? They're worried that 30-ish percent of the Republican Party that is hardcore MAGA, that would never vote for a Republican again if they turn on Donald Trump, that they pick the right reason to turn on Donald Trump so those voters will still vote Republican. Now, I mentioned when talking about would the Republicans turn on Donald Trump about things going on, and I mentioned Minnesota. Well, everyone wonders what are the Democrats doing? Why aren't the Democrats doing anything? Well, we find out today that Eric Swalwell and another representative whose name escapes me right now uh, introduced a bill that would restrict the qualified immunity for ICE agents. And instead of being deferred to and being much broader, that they would put out a strict test that courts would have to adhere to as far as whether or not qualified immunity stands. Now, this is great in practice and it's a good talking point. Problem is, I don't think this bill is actually going to go anywhere. Now, it was discussed, I believe, on the floor of the House, which is a step in the right direction because I assumed Mike Johnson was going to try to bury it. Because Republicans like to bury things that are negative to Donald Trump, but they didn't. They were allowing discussion on this. But even if it passes the House, we have no idea what's going to happen when it gets to the Senate. It may get squashed there, whether it gets just buried or never taken up, or if they end up taking it up, but ultimately rejecting it. Either one of those would be a bad option. Um, but either way, even if the Senate passes it, unless it's overwhelming, Donald Trump would never sign it unless he had this wild hair where he thought that even with this new test that it would make it easier for ICE to get qualified immunity. And because Donald Trump doesn't read anything, he may be able to be fooled enough that he would sign it, um, which is very telling because Donald Trump is not very bright. We know that he is having a lot of mental issues, etc., and that you're pretty much able to tell him whatever he wants to hear and get him to do whatever you really want him to do. And maybe that's what they do with this bill. But the thing is, the fact that it's even being discussed and not buried is a sign in the right direction. Now, hopefully, they move forward with something like this after this administration is completely gone and a Democrat's back in charge. So they move on to doing it not just for ICE, but for all law enforcement, making it easier to take away that qualified immunity because that immunity ruling has people like these ICE agents doing whatever they want because they have no fear of being charged with any sort of a crime. It is very, very telling about how these ICE agents operate. We can tell they're poorly trained. We hear that they are not getting the training they even used to get, that it is getting weaker and weaker when it comes to how much training they get because, they cut it back. They cut back training in hopes that, they could move it along and get these ICE agents out. And a lot of them are rejects from other law enforcement agencies, from the military. Some of them are, at least a good number of them are from groups like Patriot Front, the Three Percenters, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, etc. Those paramilitary groups that think they're tough and they're Billy Badasses. Um, and they've been around for a long time. I remember there was a neighbor we had when I was growing up in a rental house. Uh, the house next to ours was a rental, and the people that had rented it at one point, him and his kids, the kids were about my age, um, they would at night dress up in fatigues and do practice drills up and down, the driveway and stuff. They creeped out a lot of the neighbors, and the whole neighborhood was glad when they moved on. But they've been around forever, and we need to do something when this administration is gone about cracking down on these groups, um, because they're really not adding to the conversation. They're not really there to defend anybody. And realistically, they do things like January 6th, where they've caused nothing but problems. Now, Maria Machado, the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize winner, the assumed correct winner of the 2024 Venezuelan elections, the opposition leader in Venezuela, etc., was in the United States today and was talking to Donald Trump. And I think she was trying to smooth talk Donald Trump, trying to get his support, because everybody was surprised that Donald Trump didn't put in the opposition leader, instead just allowed the vice president under Maduro to take control, this Delcy Rodriguez. And uh, one of the reasons we had heard of maybe unofficially as to why he didn't put in Machado as the interim president of Venezuela was because she did not turn over the Nobel Peace Prize to him. He thought that she should have just declined the Nobel Peace Prize when it was awarded to her and said, well, no, Donald Trump deserves it awarded to him. But the Nobel Committee has come out, and they came out again today and said, once awarded, the prize cannot be transferred. It cannot be given away. It cannot be rejected, basically. And they can't actually pull it. Now, a lot of people are saying she should have the Nobel Prize pulled from her. And maybe the Nobel Committee will change their mind on whether or not they, as a committee, have the right to take it away after her actions today. But what did she do? Well, she came into the Oval Office, met with Donald Trump, kissed his ass, and she presented him with a framed uh, big thing that he can hang up. It looked to be poster sized. It had her 2025 Nobel Prize and a certificate and some other things in there, where she basically said she was gifting her Nobel Prize to Donald Trump because he deserved it. Now, she has come out before and she sounds like a big Trump supporter. Now, why would a foreign opposition leader support Donald Trump? Well, at this point, coming out and doing these kind of things, she is hoping that because he has already removed Maduro, that would lead to her being put on as the next leader of Venezuela. So she's trying to play the long game here, and she's kissing his ass. Now, we didn't know, at least at first, whether or not Donald Trump was going to keep it. The couple of articles I read on it made it sound like it was unclear as to whether or not he was going to keep it. And I call that bullshit reporting. Because even if it was unclear, we know Donald Trump. We know how he thinks. We know how he acts. And there was 0% chance Donald Trump was going to do anything other than keep it. Now, this is going to be a conversation piece. This is something he can point at and go, look, see, I have a Nobel Peace Prize. He did not earn it. And the Nobel Committee came out again today and said the same thing, that he did not earn the Nobel Peace Prize. And this isn't the first award and honor that he has taken. There were, I think, two different veterans who gave Donald Trump their Purple Heart. And he was talking about how he always had wanted one, etc. But this is the man who deferred from being drafted like 5 different times for bone spurs because he didn't want to go to Vietnam. He found a reason to get out of it. He has no love of the military. And he talks about the dead and the wounded as losers and suckers. When talking about John McCain, who was an American hero and a great senator, former presidential candidate, who had been a former POW and had spent I think it was a year or two as a prisoner of war, when he comes out and says, "Well, I prefer my heroes to have not been captured," which is really a classy thing to say, all sarcasm implied. I mean, Donald Trump keeping this Nobel Prize just shows how tasteless, how classless, and how uh, uncaring he is. He doesn't care that somebody else earned it. He just wants that trophy. And now I'm waiting to see, are the Republicans going to come out and call him out on the participation trophy? One of the things we always hear out of the very conservatives, or out of some conservatives anyway, is, well, we don't like participation trophies. And especially you hear it out of the baby boomers, when their generation was the one who came up with participation trophies for our generation and the younger ones, to make sure everybody got some kind of a trophy or an award. And that's what all Donald Trump is getting here, is participation trophies. Actually, I mentioned the show MASH quite a bit, but it kind of, him getting this Nobel Prize when it's given to him, kind of reminds me of Frank Burns in MASH. And there's two different episodes where Frank Burns comes up with some reason as to why he got injured, and he gets awarded a Purple Heart. Now, in the one episode, if I remember right, he was having fun with Major Houlihan, and they were dancing or something, and he threw his back out, and officially, because he couldn't get caught in her tent, um, they made it look like he fell down and threw his back out, uh, trying to go to the shower, and he got a Purple Heart for it. And it completely ridiculous, and other antics ensue where he doesn't get to keep it. The other one is something about making breakfast with an actual egg, and he got a piece of eggshell in his eye while they were under fire or something, and he put on the official award request or whatever, shell fragment. Well, yeah, it was a shell fragment of eggshell, not, you know, gun shell, or not artillery shell or anything like that. And just trying to get something he didn't earn because he actually wanted it. Just reminds me of Donald Trump. Now, talked a little bit before about everything going on in Minneapolis and Minnesota in general, where they have ICE all over the place, and they're sending in thousands of ICE agents. Um, and it's getting bad up there. Now, Tim Walz has yet to call out the National Guard. He's talked about it, but he hasn't done it yet. And um, some people are suggesting that, well, if he does, Donald Trump could just nationalize the Minnesota Guard and send them elsewhere. And that's entirely possible. And maybe that is why Tim Walz isn't doing this. Um, but he should maybe at least attempt to do something to protect the citizens. However, if you are dealing with doing that, then you are looking at potentially state versus federal government, etc. Would that actually be a civil war? It gets messy, but they need to do something. The time for strong words is over. They needed to take some kind of an action against this government and the overreach that it's doing. Well, Donald Trump wanting to calm things down, and he thinks the only way he can do it is by sounding like the tough guy. He comes out on Truth Social and says, basically, if the protests of ICE continue and if they keep interfering with ICE doing their job, that he is going to declare the Insurrection Act, and that's going to allow him to send the military in and start, peacekeeping efforts. Well, this is going to probably end just like Donald Trump trying to send the National Guard into California, where the courts said, yeah, well, initially they said no. Then they came back and said maybe. California was a little weird. Into Portland, where the courts said no. Into Chicago, where the courts said no. Even Washington, D.C., the courts at least the lower court said, yeah, you can't do that. You don't have the authority. And the appellate court said, well, kind of. Um, Ultimately, this would end up getting challenged all the way to the Supreme Court. But see, Donald Trump is talking about declaring the Insurrection Act. And here's the thing, why are they so focused on it? Well, in part because it allows Donald Trump to use the military um, in civilian matters. Now, normally there is what is called posse comitatus, which basically prevents the military from being used against civilians. They are supposed to only be used for military reasons or other things, like when they call the National Guard up, which has happened numerous times here in the state of Iowa um, in the summers to deal with flooding and to, you know, help reinforce levees and for, protecting people that way. When Donald Trump has called up the National Guard to help with peacekeeping efforts, they don't have law enforcement capabilities. They have very limited ability, and basically they're just there to protect ICE. And that would again be most of what would happen there is it would just be using National Guard or even full military members to protect the ICE agents because the ICE agents are getting shouted at, right? These ICE agents are doing whatever they want right now because they feel like they are immune. And to some extent, they are. They feel like there are going to be no consequences to any of their actions when it comes to anything going on. They go out and we've seen videos of them pushing people and protesters into oncoming traffic. There was another video I saw where um, a suspect was trying to flee uh, ICE custody and um, had no weapon, was just trying to get away, and they rammed him with a vehicle, with a truck, an unmarked truck. And you can't use deadly force to combat running away. It's not an appropriate amount of force. But see, they're not scared. They want us scared when it comes to what ICE is doing. And Donald Trump now coming out and saying that he is going to use um, the military or he could use the Insurrection Act. It's again trying to be the tough guy. It's trying to look strong and tough while threatening American citizens. We've never had a president act this way. If we had had a Democratic president acting this way, right wing media would have been all over it, talking about how now is the time to use your Second Amendment, what a tyrannical government. But because it's their side doing it, the right wing, for the most part, is rolling over, playing dead, and allowing them to do all of this. Talked about it earlier. When's it going to be too much? And it sounds like the too much is going to be Greenland, but they're already having the discussions. So if they already have the votes because of Greenland, how close are they with votes because of ICE and what ICE is doing? How close are they with votes because of the Epstein files, etc.? We don't know, but I think those discussions are happening behind closed doors. And when they get to that point and they make that move, do not be surprised if once Donald Trump does get impeached, that they pull the trigger and he is gone. Now he may not be the only one impeached. Talking about this ICE uh, problem in Minneapolis and Minnesota in general, Kristi Noem, they are talking about impeaching and removing her. Sounds like they are getting closer to bipartisan support for that because of how this is all playing out. And she's not the only one potentially under fire. Another one is Pam Bondi and Kash Patel over the handling of the Epstein investigation and the Epstein file release because they are way behind on releasing the Epstein files. We are at only about 1%. Now, judges are asking questions and saying, hey, you guys are almost a month behind the deadline here. Where is everything? You've been ordered to produce more and to get this all out there. Why haven't you complied? Now, some of them could start facing contempt of court charges, which could face fines. They could face other penalties, including imprisonment, because they are trying to protect somebody in this administration. And more than likely, it sounds like it's Donald Trump. Now, if there's anything in there that could corroborate Sasha Riley's story, and I've talked about Sasha Riley yesterday, don't know that this is a true story. However, if this is true, there's a couple things in there that are rather telling. First of all, according to Sasha Riley, as I talked about yesterday, Donald Trump was not just a partner or a client of Epstein. According to Sasha Riley, Donald Trump was the kingpin, and that Epstein was the fall guy or the manager, the one to get caught if everything went sideways. And that's what apparently has happened here. And also, according to Sasha Riley, it was all Donald Trump's doing. He was the big shot. He helped broker girls to Epstein through the beauty pageants and other means. If any of this turns out to be true, the Republicans are going to have to answer for a lot of it when it comes out. And that was one of the reasons why they voted to release the Epstein files in the first place, is because they didn't want to answer to the voters for protecting those that were accused of doing things to children. So we are waiting to see if there's anything that can corroborate whatever happened with Sasha Riley, any part of this story. Apparently, Sasha Riley was a young boy, an underage boy, who was also a victim of Epstein. And that part actually does make sense, because it wouldn't surprise me that there were also male victims. Now, one of the other more outrageous stories out of everything Sasha Riley was talking about, and I talked about it yesterday and on yesterday's podcast with the Rational Boomer, is this story that Sasha Riley was camping or out in the woods or something with Donald Trump, which that part does kind of surprise me. I don't quite know. Uh, at least I think they were out in the woods or something. Um, Not 100% sure on that detail, but apparently Donald Trump was trying to do something, or had just done something to Sasha Riley, one or the two, and either to get away or out in retaliation for what just had happened, that Sasha Riley had shoved a tent stake up Donald Trump's ass. And according to Sasha Riley, that is the reason why Donald Trump now needs to wear diapers. Um, I don't know if that is true. That is a very wild story. If it is true, there could be some corroborating evidence in the Epstein files. Um, of course, Donald Trump has not responded to any of these allegations, which is weird, because Sasha Riley, this is out there. People are talking about it, and Donald Trump's not reacting to it, which normally, you know how Donald Trump reacts to everything. And that is him coming out, oh, it's a lie, it's a hoax, it's this, and he's pretty quiet. Same thing happened when they came out with the story talking about him and Bubba. You know, he never really came out, never said much about whether or not he did anything with Bubba, just kind of ignored it. Now, a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon when Bubba was mentioned, talking about how, well, it must be Bill Clinton. And of course, Clinton has come out and just said, well, release all the files. Hasn't said that it's true, hasn't said that it's false, just said release everything. So, um, yeah, we're waiting to see if there's any corroborating evidence there for the Sasha Riley story. That's kind of outrageous if it's true. Now, last thing I'm going to kind of cover here is yesterday. At least I think this was yesterday at the um, Oval Office ceremony where he was talking about milk. It might have been talking about something else. He went on like a 5-minute rant at one point in the Oval Office. I guess I'm not sure exactly what he was talking about when this rant went on, but if you watch the official clip of, and this might even be something from something else that they put out that was touched up with AI because the camera cuts back and forth to different angles, which is a little weird. It's a little weird about how they cut back and forth and stuff, but he's full intensity and he looks angry and stuff. And you can see he's got his normal orange tan line crappy makeup on that he wears all the time. That looks normal. But then if you look at his hands, now his hands are sitting there. They're not doing anything weird. That's not what makes me think of AI. But you notice the color. They're turning blue, like that he's dealing with very poor circulation. Now you add that into all of the other things we have been seeing. You add in the chronic venous insufficiency that they've been talking about for months about that's why his ankles are so swollen. Um, you talk about the uh, fact that there's at least speculation that he is taking IV anti dementia meds because of the bruising on his hands, etc., and how now it's on both hands, not just one. And as I've talked about before, the backup place to get an IV going, if they cannot get your arm, they typically go to the back of the hand. And now that he's got bruising on both hands, people are noticing that. And now that his hands are blue, that's another sign of very poor circulation. And I'm seeing a lot of comments saying, well, I knew somebody whose hands were always blue like that, and it wasn't long after they were gone. Well, that could be what's going on here. It's probably a sign of very poor circulation, among other things. It's just another reason why I think he has got some major health things going on, and I think he is aware of what is going on with his health. Now, for a lot of things, he acts like he's in the dark. Like, for example, he took an MRI or a CT, one of the two, because he came back later and said, well, it wasn't an MRI, it was a CT. Doesn't matter if it was an MRI or a CT or whatever. He says, well, I don't know what they were looking at. I think he did. And I think he's more aware of how bad his health is than he's letting on. He wants us to believe he is in perfect health. And I think he knows that it's not that great. And I think he's been given a time frame. And I think that's why he's doing all of the things he is doing. He went into Venezuela because he got, I mean, it's partly to distract from the Epstein files. It's partially revenge on Maduro for what he called a slap in the face for dancing and, taunting the United States. But it's also to just achieve something that he wanted to get done as part of his legacy. Same now that he's talking about Greenland, he's talking about the ballroom, and he's talking about the Arc de Triomphe and all of these things, and he put his name on the Kennedy Center. I think he knows he has limited time left, and that ultimately, um, when his time is up, he wants to have as much done as he can for his legacy. I just do not believe any which way that he makes it to the end of his term come January 20th, 2029. I think his health is going to get him between here and there. And if his health doesn't, I mentioned earlier that Representative Don Bacon said they have the votes uh, to impeach and remove him should he invade Greenland. His own party may remove him, and if Greenland is one of the stepping stones, makes me wonder how many other conversations they've had, as I've talked about a couple times in this podcast. Makes me wonder what else is going on there when they are going to say enough is enough. So his own party could go after him. JD Vance could invoke the 25th at some point and try to remove him. Any of those things are possible. Now, the last option would be for Donald Trump to resign. And I don't see him resigning unless there is some kind of immunity thing in place where he knows he is going to be 100% safe. And I just don't see that happening. I don't think he is going to get the Nixon treatment and get an actual pardon from JD Vance. So I don't think that's going to be the way he goes out. But his health not looking good. Now his hands are appearing to be more blue. And now maybe this was just a one-off and it's bad lighting. But if it was only the one thing, I probably wouldn't have even talked about it. But when you add it in with everything else going on with his health, etc., it just makes you wonder how bad it really is, and is it getting worse? And how long does he really have left? All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I hope you have a great day, and we will be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.